My name is Jessica Howard and I'm going to do a presentation on learning a second language at a young age. This is Turret. He's going to be a prop at some point in the video. Go sit. The development of learning a second language at a young age can benefit children regarding their cognitive, linguistic, and creative abilities, opening them up to greater opportunities as an adult. Please go sit. The 3 points that I'm going to go over include what part of the brain controls language and what happens to the brain during the learning of a second language, the incorporation of language into our educational system today, as well as the benefits of learning a second language. So the first thing we're going to go over is the brain. So if you look right here, there's 4 parts to the brain, including the temporal lobe, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe. The main part of the brain that controls language is the parietal lobe, but all of the other regions also aid into it. The temporal lobe talking about visual and auditory memory, and the frontal lobe aids in creative thinking, problem solving, and attention. The brain is then divided into 2 hemispheres, which are the left and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere is the part of the brain that controls language. There's an additional part in the brain that aids in language, and it's called the Wernicke's area. The actual function is unknown, but we do know that it helps formulate speech. An article called How the Brain Learns a Second Language by Gargi Thakur is a study on how the brain processes first and second languages, and that there's a distinct difference between someone who's learned a second language as a child versus someone who's learned a second language as an adult, and how their brain processes it. According to Joy Hirsch, a study that she did involving the 2 parties shows that the difficulty of adult learners of a second language who are not learning it as children have a problem with not understanding the words of the second language, but with the motor skills of forming the word with the mouth and the tongue. So imagine how hard it is to speak in a native tongue and make it sound fluent and like it is natural. According to Forbes magazine, only 18% of Americans report knowing a second language, compared to that with 53% of Europeans and other surrounding nations that can speak either a second language or more. The Global Language Project, 21 of the top 25 industrialized countries begin the study of world languages in grades K through 5. 80% of students in Europe speak at least 2 languages. Over 55 million students in the U.S. public schools, only 50,000 students study Mandarin Chinese, a language spoken by over 1 billion people in the world worldwide. Only 14% of U.S. students consider themselves bilingual. Now, as we all know, language is one of those first extracurricular programs in schools to be cut, which is kind of ironic considering that you have to have 2 consecutive language credits in order to graduate. Again, these are some more statistics from Forbes magazine about language and how it's incorporated into the educational system. The percentage of all middle schools offering foreign language instruction decreased from 75 to 58%. The percentage of high schools offering some foreign languages remain the same at about 91%. That's because it's required to graduate. But again, the amount of selections that students have for what language they want to take has decreased. About 25% of elementary schools and 30% of middle schoolers report a shortage of qualified foreign language teachers. In 2009 to 2010, only 50.7% of higher education institutions required foreign language studies for baccalaureate, down from 67.5% in 1994 to 1995. Many colleges and universities, including Cornell, have reduced or eliminated instructional offerings in less popular languages, which popular languages would include French, Spanish, German, but less popular would be Chinese, Japanese, things like that. Emily Rios is a famous model/actress on the popular television show Breaking Bad, which I'm sure most of you have seen. And she said, you know, even growing up going to school, I had teachers that were against bilingual teaching. I never understood that. My parents always had me speak Spanish first, knowing that I was going to speak English in school. So it's more prominent in students that have a different language other than English as their first language to understand that most people aren't going to be bilingual. The benefits of learning second languages include higher test scores, better and more advanced reading skills, greater opportunities for college and careers. It also can improve the resume as opposed to somebody who doesn't have any sort of language on the resume. A bigger view of the world, meaning they understand more of different cultures. For example, I'm taking an ASL class, and you would never really think that the deaf culture is a culture, but their world is entirely different from the American hearing world. Better understanding of native tongue, meaning it can increase your vocabulary because you know a second language. And again, having studied ASL, I can account to this. While working in a physician's office about 1.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to speak with somebody who learned a second language at a young age. His name was Sandeep Manjal, and he was from India. He said that when he went to school, it was required for kids to know English, and a lot of times they were required to know Spanish or, you know, another popular language. He said that when he learned English as a child, it was much easier for him to adapt coming to America because he already knew how to speak the language. It was easier to kind of accustom himself to the traditions in America as opposed to those of India. If he hadn't have been bilingual, it would have been much more difficult, is what he said. Truett, can you come here? So this is Truett, and he's been learning some sign language, so I'm just going to show you an example of how fast children can pick up language. So can you look at me? What's the sign for coffee? Very good. What's the sign for train? Good job. What's the sign for sit? Good. What's the sign for chair? What's the sign for milk? Very good. What's the sign for mother? Like this? Mother. What's the sign for father? Up here. Good job. What's the sign for love? What's the sign for baby? Very good. What's the sign for play? This. Hold your hand out. Fold these fingers down. Fold these fingers down. Hold your hand down, it's okay. Like that. Good job. Okay, you can go sit. Now about 3 or 4 of those he already knew, so he did it off of memory. And those are signs that I've only gone over a couple times. His dad also stated that the other day he had a customer that was deaf that came into his office to buy a car, and Truett's been teaching him the sign for coffee over and over because that's his favorite sign. And that he asked them if they wanted some coffee, and they were extremely impressed because he could sign that one little blip. I lost my folder. Okay, sorry, I lost my card. So again, we've gone over what part of the brain controls language, what happens to the brain briefly when we're learning a second language, the benefits of learning a second language, and as well as how it's incorporated into our present day educational system, which we can see is kind of at the lower end of the scale in importance. So the development of learning a second language at a young age can benefit linguistic, cognitive, and creative abilities, and it's easier for them to learn as opposed to an adult